A stunning announcement by President Trump today. He wants to reopen Alcatraz for, quote, America's most ruthless and violent offenders.
In one of his podcast episodes, Joe Rogan relived the infamous prison break Derek's real-life channel. After long years of wondering, the mystery behind the actual happenings and process during the 1962 Alcatraz escape has finally been solved. Thanks to authorities and experts, the process and actual happenings to this unimaginable break free are no longer a mystery. Rogan expressed fascination with how inmates Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin used remarkable ingenuity, creating dummy heads from soap and toilet paper, tunneling through prison walls, and crafting a makeshift raft from raincoats to vanish into the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay. Despite an intense manhunt, no bodies were ever found, and the FBI eventually concluded the trio drowned, though many, including Rogan, remain intrigued by the possibility that they survived. The mystery continues to spark debate, documentaries, and conspiracy theories, making it a perfect fit for Rogan's brand of curious, open-ended exploration of historical enigmas. But first, Trump wants to reopen the notorious prison. Donald Trump's recent announcement to reopen Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary has stirred widespread controversy and debate. The infamous prison, located on an island in San Francisco Bay, was closed in 1963 due to high operational costs and deteriorating infrastructure. However, Trump's decision to bring it back into operation reflects his continued push for strict criminal justice measures and a symbolic return to a law and order approach. As part of his broader political messaging, reopening Alcatraz would serve as both a functional facility for high-risk inmates and a national symbol of tough-on-crime policy. Historically, Alcatraz held some of the most notorious criminals in American history, including Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Robert Franklin Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz. Known for its high-security layout and inescapable geography, the prison operated as a maximum-security federal institution for nearly 30 years. It was eventually shut down due to the immense cost of maintaining operations on a remote island and the wear and tear of its aging infrastructure. Since then, it has become a National Historic Landmark and a popular tourist attraction managed by the National Park Service. The suggestion to repurpose it back into a federal prison represents a dramatic shift in how the site is viewed and used. Trump's reasoning for reopening the facility centers on reasserting federal control over crime and emphasizing harsh punishment for violent offenders. He has suggested that modern prisons are overcrowded and that a revived Alcatraz could serve as a special holding facility for the worst of the worst. In his statement, Trump characterized the move as part of a broader crackdown on crime, positioning it as both a deterrent to criminal behavior and a demonstration of his administration's authority. The proposal also appeals to his political base, which has often supported more aggressive law enforcement policies and criticized reforms perceived as being too lenient. However, the plan has met resistance from state and local officials, particularly in California. Governor Gavin Newsom and other state leaders have criticized the idea as impractical and symbolic rather than effective. They argue that the financial cost of rehabilitating and modernizing the site would be massive, and that using a national park as a federal prison again could set a troubling precedent. Additionally, since the National Park Service currently manages the island, any such conversion would face significant legal and environmental hurdles. Critics also suggest that Trump's proposal is more of a political stunt than a well-thought-out policy aimed at generating headlines, rather than solving real problems in the criminal justice system. While Donald Trump's proposal to reopen Alcatraz prison aligns with his long-standing commitment to tough criminal justice policies, it raises serious questions about feasibility, cost, and the broader implications for historic preservation. The idea appeals to certain voters who value symbolic shows of strength, but it remains unclear whether such a move would be effective or necessary in addressing the root causes of crime. As the debate continues, it will be important to weigh the potential benefits of reopening Alcatraz against the historical, legal, and financial costs of such a dramatic decision. In case everyone forgot, do you remember the remarkable escape from Alcatraz in 1962? Why would the president want to reopen the place when it has failed the government before? It wasn't as effective as everyone expected it to be. The analysis of an intelligent escape. As we go along, you might picture some scenes in the familiar films that you've already watched. On the night of June 11th, 1962, 3 inmates at the notorious Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary pulled off what remains one of the most daring and enigmatic prison escapes in history. Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin vanished from the maximum security island prison in San Francisco Bay, leaving behind a trail of brilliant improvisation, unanswered questions, and a legacy that continues to intrigue criminologists, historians, and the public. The Alcatraz escape was not just a tale of physical escape from an inescapable prison, but also a testament to human ingenuity, perseverance, and mystery. It happened. It was real. Alcatraz was designed to be escape-proof. Opened in 1934, the prison housed some of America's most dangerous criminals. Its isolation, surrounded by the cold, treacherous waters of the San Francisco Bay, served as a natural deterrent. In its 29 years of operation, 36 inmates tried to escape in 14 attempts. Most were captured or killed. Officially, none succeeded. The trio behind the 1962 escape were not typical violent offenders. Frank Morris, born in 1926, was an intelligent man with an IQ reportedly around 133. He was a seasoned criminal with a record of prison escapes. John and Clarence Anglin, born into a family of 13 children in Georgia, were known for their strong bond and teamwork. They had a long history of robbery and had served time in various prisons, often transferred due to repeated escape attempts. The 3 men had met previously in the Atlanta penitentiary and were eventually reunited at Alcatraz, which unknowingly sealed the beginning of the most famous prison break in US history. A year in the making. The escape plan, meticulously executed, was born from months of preparation and covert collaboration. The brains of the operation, Frank Morris, was joined by the Anglin brothers and later Alan West, another inmate who helped prepare the escape but ultimately failed to get out in time. The group used crude tools, a homemade drill crafted from a vacuum cleaner motor and metal spoons stolen from the mess hall, to widen the ventilation ducts in their cells. Every night they would chip away at the concrete walls behind their sinks, hiding the noise with music and concealing the holes with cardboard and paint. One of the most ingenious elements of their plan was the creation of realistic dummy heads, crafted from soap, toilet paper, and human hair gathered from the prison barbershop. These heads were placed on their pillows to fool the night guards during head count. Underneath the cell walls, the prisoners accessed a utility corridor and a network of unguarded service tunnels. Above the cell block, they assembled a makeshift raft and life vests, using over 50 stolen raincoats. The materials were glued with a homemade adhesive derived from soap and used to construct a 614-foot rubber raft, complete with paddles made from wood and screws. They stored these materials in the rafters, above the prison ceiling, accessed through the holes they had created. The night of the escape. After over 6 months of preparation, the meticulously orchestrated escape plan was finally put into motion on the night of Monday, June 11th, 1962. Each participant was acutely aware that they were taking an enormous risk, not only of recapture, but of drowning in the icy, unpredictable waters of San Francisco Bay. The escapees had waited for a night with favorable tides and minimal moonlight, ensuring darkness would provide cover as they made their desperate bid for freedom. The 4 original conspirators, Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Alan West, had synchronized every detail in advance, but when the moment came, Alan West was unable to remove the grill in his cell. Unlike the others, West had secured the vent cover in place with concrete after rehearsing to avoid detection during routine inspections. However, on the night of the escape, the concrete hardened more than expected, and he found himself frantically chipping at it for hours with no success. Trapped in his cell, and knowing he had missed his opportunity, West eventually abandoned the attempt. Later, he cooperated with authorities and became a primary source of information on the plan. Meanwhile, Morris and the Anglin brothers proceeded with precision. After successfully removing the ventilation grates at the back of their cells, they squeezed through the openings one by one into the unguarded utility corridor, a narrow service space running behind the cell block. From there, they ascended a vertical ventilation shaft, climbing pipes and structural supports until they reached a rooftop hatch they had previously loosened. Once on the roof of the prison, they carefully navigated the complex architecture, taking great care to avoid detection by guards stationed in the towers. The route involved crossing a flat expanse of the roof before descending roughly 50 feet down a vent pipe on the exterior of the building. This brought them to the rear side of the prison, where they avoided the main gates and lights, ultimately reaching the ground. They then traversed a series of fences and an open yard, heading toward the northeastern shore of Alcatraz Island, a secluded area far from guard patrols. There, hidden behind rocks and dense brush, they had previously cached their escape tools and assembled materials, the inflatable raft and life vests, painstakingly constructed from over 50 rubber raincoats, stitched and sealed with heat from steam pipes in the prison's utility areas. For inflation, they used a concertina-style bellows, a modified musical instrument reconfigured to blow air into the raft's chambers. At approximately 10 o'clock p.m., as the tide began to ebb and the chilly wind picked up, the three men launched the makeshift raft into the dark waters of San Francisco Bay. What happened next remains one of the greatest mysteries in American criminal history. Some believe they paddled north toward the Marin Headlands, possibly aiming for the area around Angel Island or Sausalito, where they might have blended into civilization. Others argue the current would have swept them out to sea, making survival unlikely. The escape was not discovered until the following morning, during the routine headcount shortly after 7 o'clock a.m. A guard making rounds stopped at the cells of Morris and the Anglin brothers and was momentarily fooled by the dummy heads, which were positioned under the blankets and appeared to be sleeping. However, when one of the heads was nudged and rolled to the floor, revealing its lifeless, artificial nature, the deception was exposed. A full emergency lockdown of the prison was immediately ordered. Sirens blared across the island. Guards began a frantic search of the premises, and Alan West, still in his cell, was quickly identified as connected to the escape. Under questioning, West confessed his role and provided authorities with the details of the plan. A massive manhunt was launched. The FBI, US Marshals Service, and Coast Guard were all mobilized. Helicopters and patrol boats scoured the surrounding waters. Search teams combed the shoreline of Angel Island, Tiburon, and Marin County for days, looking for any trace of the fugitives. The search initially turned up few leads. A few days later, some debris was recovered: a paddle, pieces of rubber material from the raft, and a life vest floating near Angel Island. But no conclusive evidence was found to prove whether the escapees had made it to shore or perished in the bay. The investigation that followed would become one of the most extensive in American penal history, remaining open for nearly 2 decades. Though the FBI officially closed the case in 1979, concluding the men had likely drowned, many, both inside law enforcement and among the public, remained unconvinced. The US Marshals, who still technically consider the escapees fugitives, have kept the case open and active into the 21st century. Guilty or innocent? It's important to remember that these men were not innocent in the eyes of the law. They were all convicted criminals who had been sentenced to lengthy prison terms for serious offenses. While their escape was a remarkable feat, their criminal records were far from clean, and their actions before and after the escape demonstrate their status as lawbreakers. Frank Morris, the mastermind behind the Alcatraz escape, had a long history of criminal activity prior to his incarceration at the infamous federal penitentiary. Morris was originally arrested for bank robbery, for which he received a 10-year sentence. His criminal activities included theft and armed robbery, both of which contributed to his reputation as a career criminal. His behavior in prison also demonstrated a clear pattern of defiance and lawlessness. Morris had previously attempted to escape from multiple institutions, a factor that led to his transfer to Alcatraz, which was known for housing the most dangerous and high-profile criminals. Morris's criminal record clearly paints a picture of someone who repeatedly broke the law, with his escape from Alcatraz simply being another chapter in his ongoing criminal activities. Similarly, the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, were also far from innocent. Like Morris, they had been convicted of serious crimes, including armed robbery and bank robbery. Before their arrival at Alcatraz, the brothers had been involved in various criminal activities, and their records included multiple escape attempts from other prisons. Their criminal pasts were marked by a willingness to take extreme risks to gain their freedom, often at the expense of the law. The Anglins, who were known for their close bond, had also been involved in several criminal endeavors together, making their escape a shared goal that they worked toward with precision and determination. They too were sentenced to Alcatraz, a high-security institution, because of their violent criminal behavior and history of attempting to break out of other prisons. While the 1962 escape from Alcatraz was a brilliant and daring act of ingenuity, it does not erase the fact that the three men were convicted criminals. Their escape was an illegal act, one that further demonstrated their willingness to flout the law and take extreme measures to gain freedom, even if it meant breaking the rules and taking life-threatening risks. In the eyes of the law, their actions were criminal, and they remained fugitives from justice for the remainder of their lives, if indeed they survived the escape attempt, as many believe. Their status as lawbreakers is an undeniable part of their story, no matter how much the public may romanticize their escape. However, the mystery surrounding their escape has led many to focus on their ingenuity and resourcefulness rather than their criminal actions. The way they meticulously planned and executed the escape, from creating lifelike dummies to craftily chiseling away at the walls of their cells, has led some to view them as symbols of cleverness and resilience rather than mere criminals. The media, films, and books have helped to perpetuate this narrative, casting them as anti-heroes rather than as individuals who committed serious offenses. The mystery of whether they survived their escape, compounded by the fact that their bodies were never found, only fueled public fascination, making their escape a legend. Despite the allure of their escape, the men were not innocent. The cultural fascination with their cleverness and the mystery surrounding their potential survival may cause some to romanticize their story, but legally, they were convicted felons who had committed severe crimes before and after their escape attempt. Their criminal records and behavior underscore the fact that their escape was an act of lawlessness, not heroism. While they may have managed to outwit one of the most secure prisons in the United States, this does not change the fact that they were criminals who had broken the law numerous times before and after their attempt to flee Alcatraz. While the myth of their survival and the ingenuity of their escape has captured the imagination of many, it is essential to remember that the truth of their actions lies within the context of their criminal pasts and their defiance of the law. Aftermath and theories. The official stance of the United States government, upheld by the FBI until the case was formally closed in 1979, was that Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin likely drowned during their daring 1962 escape attempt from Alcatraz. This conclusion was primarily based on the challenging environmental conditions of San Francisco Bay, the strong tidal currents, which can exceed 6 knots, and the cold water temperatures, which typically range between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia could set in within minutes under such conditions, especially for men without proper cold water gear. Additionally, no bodies were ever recovered, nor were there any verified sightings in the immediate aftermath of the escape. The presence of personal belongings floating near Angel Island, as well as a life vest later discovered with teeth marks, supported the government's presumption of death. However, this narrative has long been met with skepticism and has fueled a wide array of alternative theories. Critics argue that the absence of bodies is not necessarily proof of death. The Pacific Ocean is vast and unforgiving, and many drowning victims are never recovered. Moreover, Alcatraz's history of treating prisoners as irredeemable and its reputation as escape-proof have led many to suspect that authorities were eager to preserve its image and suppress the possibility of a successful escape. Adding to the intrigue, Alcatraz was officially decommissioned and shut down in March 1963, less than a year after the escape. The government cited high operational costs, the island's remote location, and its rapidly deteriorating infrastructure as primary reasons. Nonetheless, the timing of the closure has remained suspicious to some, who believe that the escape may have revealed significant security flaws. If the most secure prison in the United States could be breached, it would reflect poorly on the federal justice system during the height of the Cold War, a time when national image and internal stability were critical. Over the decades, dozens of alleged sightings and tips have surfaced. Family members of the Anglin brothers, in particular, have been vocal in asserting their belief that John and Clarence survived the escape. According to them, the family received cryptic postcards, unsigned messages, and even phone calls over the years that they believe came from the brothers. One of the most compelling claims arose in 2013, when a documentary aired a photograph allegedly taken in 1975 showing two men in Brazil who bore a strong resemblance to the Anglins. The image reportedly came from a family friend who had travelled to South America and believed he encountered the escapees. Then, in 2018, a letter surfaced and was forwarded to the FBI. Allegedly written by Frank Morris himself, the letter claimed that all three men survived the escape and lived under assumed identities. Morris, according to the letter, was in poor health and wanted to negotiate a deal for medical treatment in exchange for revealing his identity. While handwriting analysis and forensic testing by the FBI did not definitively confirm the letter's authenticity, they also could not conclusively debunk it. This ambiguity only added more fuel to the enduring mystery. Further, in 2020, advancements in facial recognition technology allowed experts to analyze the 1975 photograph more thoroughly. Comparing it to known images of the Anglin brothers, the experts concluded that there was a high probability the men in the photo were indeed the escapees. Though not considered legal proof, this analysis provided enough plausible doubt to keep the case open with the US Marshals Service, which continues to treat the men as fugitives. While the official position leans toward the men having perished in the bay, the case's lingering uncertainties and occasional new leads leave open the possibility that Morris and the Anglins might have pulled off the impossible and lived to tell the tale. Now, let's talk science. Don't go. We're getting more technical here. The escape from Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary remains one of the most fascinating prison breaks in American history. Morris and brothers John and Clarence managed to escape from what was considered the most secure prison of its time. Their escape plan demonstrated an extraordinary understanding of environmental conditions, human psychology, and rudimentary engineering. From a scientific standpoint, their success hinged on meticulous observation, innovation, and a deep understanding of their surroundings, including the prison structure and the challenging natural environment surrounding Alcatraz Island. The prisoners used basic tools like sharpened spoons and an improvised drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor to chip away the concrete around the air vents in their cells. This process took months and highlights not only their patience but also their understanding of material properties. The salt air around Alcatraz had eroded the concrete over time, weakening the walls and making them more susceptible to hand tools. Scientifically, this is an example of material degradation due to environmental exposure, specifically chloride-induced corrosion that affects concrete and steel in marine environments. One of the most impressive aspects of their escape was the construction of a makeshift raft and life vests from over 50 raincoats. This demonstrates practical knowledge of buoyancy and material science. The design leveraged the waterproof nature of rubberized fabric to trap air, a principle akin to the workings of inflatable rafts. Furthermore, the men timed their escape to coincide with a late-night tide that would help carry them towards San Francisco Bay, indicating an awareness of tidal science and current patterns. However, this also introduced the most scientifically contested part of the escape: whether they survived the treacherous waters. The waters of San Francisco Bay are cold, with temperatures averaging around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit at night. Hypothermia can set in within an hour in such conditions, especially if the body is exposed and stationary. Scientists have analyzed the ocean currents, tides, and temperatures from that night in June 1962 to determine the likelihood of survival. A 2003 Mythbusters experiment and a 2014 study by Delft University used computational fluid dynamics and historical weather data to model the escape. They concluded that survival was indeed possible, especially if the men left at the optimal time window between 11 o'clock p.m. and midnight, when the currents would have been most favorable. Despite decades of investigation, no conclusive evidence has been found to confirm whether the men perished in the waters or successfully escaped. Forensic age progression images and anecdotal sightings have fueled speculation, but scientifically, the lack of recovered bodies or personal effects makes the case unresolved. The escape from Alcatraz remains a compelling intersection of criminal ingenuity and scientific inquiry, where environmental science, material engineering, and physics all played critical roles in one of history's greatest prison break mysteries. The cultural impact of the escape. What began as a dramatic criminal event quickly evolved into a symbol of ingenuity, defiance, and the enduring allure of the American outlaw myth. The escape challenged the authority and reputation of the American penal system at a time when Alcatraz stood as the ultimate symbol of unbreakable incarceration. Alcatraz had a reputation for being utterly inescapable due to its isolated location on a rocky island surrounded by the cold, shark-infested waters of San Francisco Bay. When Morris and the Anglin brothers successfully breached the prison's security, it shattered public confidence in the infallibility of federal law enforcement and sparked debates about prison conditions, surveillance, and rehabilitation versus punishment. Culturally, the 1962 escape tapped into a broader American fascination with underdog stories and rebellious heroes who outwit authority. The escapees, though convicted criminals, were soon mythologized in the media and popular culture. They became figures of fascination, clever, resourceful, and fearless, who had taken on a system designed to crush individual freedom and won, at least temporarily. The public's imagination was further fueled by the mystery of their fate. Despite extensive investigations, their bodies were never recovered, and no definitive evidence has confirmed whether they drowned or survived. This ambiguity added to the legend, transforming the event from a simple prison break into a compelling, unsolved mystery. The cultural impact of the escape was amplified by its portrayal in film and literature. The most notable example is the 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood as Frank Morris. The film dramatized the event with suspense and grit, reinforcing the image of the escapees as clever anti-heroes rather than mere criminals. Eastwood's stoic portrayal helped cement the escape in the collective imagination as a story of determination and cunning. The film, along with numerous books, documentaries, and television specials, kept the narrative alive and introduced it to new generations, each one finding its own meaning in the tale, be it resistance to oppressive systems, triumph of the human spirit, or simply an enthralling mystery. Beyond the media, the escape also impacted how Alcatraz itself was perceived. What was once a feared prison became a site of curiosity and reflection. After the prison closed in 1963, just 1 year after the escape, the island was transformed into a National Historic Site. The story of the 1962 escape became one of the central features of Alcatraz tours, drawing millions of visitors intrigued not only by the prison's notorious inmates, but also by the legendary escape. The event added an element of myth and adventure to the site, helping to shift public interest from fear of criminals to fascination with their stories. Furthermore, the escape has had a lasting influence on prison reform discourse. While not directly responsible for major policy changes, the event contributed to the broader national conversation about the effectiveness of harsh, isolating prisons like Alcatraz. Its closure a year after the escape was due to high maintenance costs and changing penal philosophies, but the escape underscored the institution's vulnerabilities and growing obsolescence. The case indirectly highlighted the need for more humane and rehabilitative approaches in the correctional system. Even today, more than 6 decades later, the story continues to resonate because at its core, it speaks to a fundamental human fascination with escape, survival, and the possibility of triumph against impossible odds. Did the 3 survive? Authorities believed that the men likely drowned in the frigid waters due to the strong currents and the distance they had to travel to reach the mainland. However, no bodies were ever recovered, and no definitive evidence has ever surfaced to prove their deaths. Some believe that the escapees may have successfully made it to shore and disappeared, possibly with the help of criminal associates or an elaborate escape plan. The lack of physical evidence and the mystery surrounding their fate have fueled speculation for decades, with theories ranging from the men surviving and living out their lives in secrecy to the possibility that they perished soon after escaping. Over the years, years, several documentaries and books have explored the mystery, reinforcing the notion that the men might have survived, even though law enforcement has never found conclusive proof. Did you like this video? Subscribe to the channel for more haunting stories like the Alcatraz escape.